to this fantastic conference and this opportunity to have a conversation about one of the most perplexing problems in our democracy, as we all know, and also what to do about it, how to measure it. Today, in our final panel, I'm really excited to have an opportunity to help convene a conversation about what to do about gerrymandering and also what role advocacy and advocates are playing and what they see as the kind of opportunity and challenges at this moment in addressing what has been and will continue to be one of our threats to our democracy. My name is Gunther Peck. I am an historian, and I'm also the director of the Heart Leadership Program, and have been thinking for a long time about how democracy is like sometimes like a hangover. If you do love alcohol, I guess, but it is something that we love, and it inspires my students. I'm inspired by their expectations of democracy, what they want it to be, as well as by their ferocious criticisms of what it is not. And that sort of duality of kind of desire, longing, and critique are things that in fact have been part of democracy from its invention. And I am really, and I take heart from that ability that they show to have both things be true at the same time. So it's partly with that in mind that we are having this final panel today, which is to think about the critique as well as a prescription, if there is such a thing, to this particular challenge we have right now around maps and their unfairness and how to make them better. So I'm hoping we'll get to the advocacy in time. We're going to begin with a kind of opening statement from each of these fantastic panelists. And then we really are hoping to have at least half the time be open for questions and engagement, and for them to engage each other and follow conversation. Each will take about 10 minutes or less to talk about reflect on what their particular organizations are doing, and also we'll turn then after that to how gerrymandering affects students and what students may or may not imagine doing to push back. So the order we're going to begin with, I'm going to begin with Jane Pinsky, who is the director of the North Carolina Coalition for Lobbying and Government Reform, Common Cause, North Carolina. Jane has been the director of the North Carolina Coalition since 2007. And she is a key player there. She works to make government at all levels more open and accessible to the citizens of North Carolina. Since 1978, Pinsky has worked for nonprofit organizations focused on civil rights, women's rights, family issues, tax reform, highway safety, children's health, which is just incredible, and as her husband says, changing the world. She has worked with groups such as NARAL, the American Nurses Association, and the National Women's Employment Project. We begin with Jane.
Well, I want to thank everybody from Duke for holding this conference and for inviting me to participate. I appreciate that Professor Peck is a historian because in terms of redistricting in North Carolina, we're reaching the stage where we're creating history. It's 32 years since the first bill that I can find was introduced in the North Carolina General Assembly. The second bill was introduced by Art Pope, who was here a little while ago in 1991. And with the exception of the 2011 session, none of those bills got a public hearing, got a committee meeting, or got to the floor of either chamber. In 2011, the North Carolina House passed a bill that would have modeled our system on that of Iowa, which was required staff-driven maps. It passed with bipartisan support in the House, and died on its way across the hall to the Senate. So unfortunately, in some ways for me, that kind of sets the scene because it's been a long, hard struggle. Common Cause has been involved in it since 2005. I have, unfortunately, the CDs of our press conferences. We sat in the offices of Mark Bassnight and Joe Hackney when they were in charge and explained to them why redistricting reform was a good idea, that North Carolina was not always going to be a Democratic state. And even in late 2010, when they could have passed last minute legislation, they did not. Because contrary to what some of the speakers in the last session said, I think all politicians believe that if they're going to be out of power, it's just for a short amount of time. And by the next redistricting, they're going to be back in power. So I think it makes it a really hard issue to get passed. I want to talk briefly about what Common Cause is doing, and more importantly, about what I see are the problems with the current redistricting. As I said, Common Cause has been doing this now for 16 years. We do it on a number of levels. My colleague Bob Phillips and I are both registered lobbyists. So when it's not COVID time, we get to spend a lot of time with legislators. We also have a number of staff people, including Bob and me, who do a lot of community organizing. We have tried to organize the 725 cities, towns, villages in North Carolina to pass resolutions calling for nonpartisan redistricting. We're in the 20s now. We hold public meetings. We try and train people how to speak at the public hearings. Most of all, we try and train people about how to talk to their legislators. It is our theory that as citizens, it is our responsibility to hold our legislators accountable. That we should, in the words of John Gardner, be peering over their shoulders at whatever they're doing. And to remind people that our elected officials are indeed our employees and they need to hear from us. So that said, let me talk about the problems that we have with the current round of redistricting. Despite what people have said, this is not the best redistricting ever. It is indeed less transparent than the 2019 session. In many ways, if you were in the last session, you heard about the public hearings. The public hearings, none of them were held in major cities. Many of them were held at times that are just impossible for those of us who work and have families at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. At least twice, the announcement said that the hearings were going to be held at X spot, and they weren't. They were someplace else. The hearing, for example, yesterday at Pembroke says it was going to be at the University of Pembroke. It was actually a building about 10 minutes off of campus. Makes it hard. You rush from work, you want to speak, you get there, and that's not where you're supposed to be. None of them were live streamed in 2011. Whatever problems we had with those hearings, I could sit at my desk or sit in Raleigh and watch what people in Ahoskie and Spruce Pine were saying. I heard none of what people were saying at the meetings. And the last people, like my colleague Lekha Shupeck, were live streaming them on their phones. And that to us is just a terrible violation of the kind of transparency government should have. Another problem in terms of transparency is that any comment you submit to the public portal may never see the light of day. Although we think that under public meetings and public records laws, those things should be immediately disclosed for every citizen in the state. They are not. We don't know when, if ever, they'll be disclosed. So I can't, as a citizen, say, I agree with Mr. Jones, who lives down the block from me, that the area prescribed by this high school or this road is indeed a community. The other thing is that there is only one hearing planned post map drawing. And that is the moment at which all of us should be able to say, okay, you missed this. This is where the line for my community is. In the 2019 round, they drew a line right down the middle of Siler City. Literally, could stand on one side of the main street and wave to myself on the other side And on one side, I was in Congressional District 4, and in the other, I was in Congressional District 13. They're going to do it again. And we won't know that till the maps are drawn. And we won't be able to say that drawing that line separates, as it did in Siler City, two parts of the Latinx community there that were diagonally opposite from each other. They did the same thing in Concord. They've done it in several other cities. The other problem is, in theory, we can all go and use the computer at the legislature to draw maps on Maptitude. Now, let me say, first of all, Maptitude is, to me, annoyingly difficult software to use, and you're going to spend an hour just trying to figure out how to do it. The second thing is, you got to do it in Raleigh. You have to make an appointment. The room in the legislative building is claustrophobic at best. And having tried in the past, when I yelled, help, 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 there's nobody within screaming distance who can come over and help me draw those maps. As was discussed again earlier today, the state of Maryland bought a bunch of copies of Maptitude that citizens could use from their home. You want to make this process open and transparent, that's the best way to do it. I suspect almost no one in the state knows that the legislature has to accept their maps. If you draw a map, they have to accept it. In the best of all worlds, they'd have to discuss it in public. And finally, the way the maps are going to be drawn. Again, in 2019, we heard this was the best process ever. It was not the best process ever. I stood there and listened to legislators say, if you move those two precincts out of my district, I'm going to go from a 75-25 victory to a 55-45 victory. Now, nobody outside the room heard it because they weren't mic'd. So nobody knew what was going on. They had legislators working at multiple computer terminals. So as a citizen, it was impossible to figure out what was going on. And it's not going to get any better this time. And with that depressing note, I'm going to turn it over to somebody else who's going to tell you positive things.
Thank you, Jane. It's okay to be critical as hell. So, our next speaker is Lekha Shupeck, who is the state director of All in the Line. Lekha is a Jewish South Asian woman who grew up in a small town in North Carolina. And just which small town?
Southern Pines.
Southern Pines. Oh, okay. Just curious. She has a law degree from Duke University, and also a PhD from the University of North Carolina. After completing graduate school, Lekha decided to use her skills and experience to make a difference in her home state, especially to lift up the experiences of people of color. Lekha left academia and started volunteering and following redistricting in the courts and in state legislatures. She joined the All in the Line team in 2019 to continue fighting for fair maps in North Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's sort of from my official bio. I didn't name the small town because if you're not from North Carolina, you probably would have never heard of Southern Pines. So my organization, All in the Line, was built to basically bring people together across all of the issues that are impacted by gerrymandering to engage in this process now this year. Everyone knows that all of these issues are impacted by gerrymandering. I think that any of you who have any connection to politics know that we have not expanded Medicaid in our state. We haven't expanded Medicaid eligibility. We believe that that is because we have a gerrymandered legislature. We're currently in a situation where we are in violation of a court order because we are not funding our education system adequately. We believe that that's because we're in a gerrymandered legislature. So I'm going to talk a little bit about myself so that you kind of know the perspective I'm coming from. And then I'll talk a little bit about sort of what I've seen observing redistricting over the years, and also sort of what we're doing at All in the Line to help people engage this year. So like I was saying, I moved here with my family when I was 5 years old. So I guess not technically native North Carolinian, but pretty close. And my parents moved here, they weren't from the South. My mom moved here from India when she was 13. And she grew up the rest of her life in New Jersey and Maine. And my dad was also just like a guy from New Jersey. But they decided to move here because at that point in time, you know, in the very early 90s, people looked at North Carolina as an emblem of what the South could become. North Carolina was the new South, right? North Carolina's education system was unrivaled in the South. People from other states came here to try to learn to do what we were doing. The RTP had started to become a huge draw for technology companies. It was really a very different place from how people thought about the South at that point in time. You know, and that's why my parents decided to move here, right? My parents, who are, you know, a Jewish man and a brown woman, decided to move here with their brown Jewish children because they thought that it would be a different place from what they had thought the South was before. You know, so I grew up here, and then I left briefly for undergrad. And then when I came back for grad school, when I came back actually here to Duke for law school, it was 2008. And that, as you know, was the year that Obama won the presidency. He won North Carolina in that election. You know, we really felt that it was sort of the start, the sort of fulfillment of all those things that we had thought North Carolina could be. That North Carolina was sort of fulfilling that fate of being that new South example. And then 2010 rolled around. And we started to see things that we thought were not North Carolina. We saw cuts to our education system. We saw laws like HB2, which targeted trans people. You know, just not things that we thought were the North Carolina that we thought we had known. And so as I started to come to the end of my grad school journey, I strongly felt that, you know, I was meant to stay here, to use the talents that I do have to make the state into a place that would work for people, that would be a good place to grow up for people who are the kids like I was. You know, all those kids from, you know, who aren't Christian, who aren't white, who are living in small towns, and who are dealing with the marginalization there. I wanted to make the state a better place to live for people like that. So in 2017, I started following the redistricting process pretty closely. At that time, that was the Covington versus North Carolina case. So that was a racial gerrymandering case about our state legislative districts. And I was really shocked when I got dug into the case by the bad faith that was involved in the drawing of those maps. You may not know the particulars, but basically a lot of the basis of that case was the legislature saying that they were drawing Voting Rights Act districts and using that as an excuse to pack as many Black voters as possible into as few districts as possible. And the court there said that, hey, you don't have any basis for using race like this. You're not doing any analysis. You don't have any good reason. You're just packing Black voters. You know, and I feel like that actual bad faith has unfortunately continued to today. We have heard over and over again from the legislature that they're not using racial or partisan data in drawing these maps. What I think that means in practice is that that data is not being uploaded to the software that they are using to draw maps. However, all of these legislators run in elections every 2 years. They are perfectly aware of the partisan and racial makeup of all the precincts in their area. Probably more than their district now because they've had so many districts. You know, so all this criticisms that Jane has brought up are, I think, well warranted. You know, we're not actually seeing, we're seeing a facade of good faith, but I don't think we're getting the real thing. So one thing that does, I think, give me hope, and one thing that I'm really glad that I've been able to do it all in the line, is that I think, like the people at the earlier panel said, people are aware now, and they're smart. They're smarter around this issue than they've ever been before. And so at all of the line, what we've really been trying to do is enable people to engage in the process in a smart way, in a way that we know is effective. So for instance, we train people to give effective public testimony. You know, I think when we think about public testimony, we see like a really wide range when people show up. A lot of people show up and talk about how they wish we had an independent commission. A lot of people, you know, show up and say that, you know, in general, they just hate the maps and they don't trust anyone. Those are all sentiments that I totally sympathize with. But what we try to do it all on the line is give people the tools to testify in a way that we think is actually effective. The limited data that we have about the kind of comments that are effective in maps means that there are comments that are geographically specific and ask for something specific. So for instance, when I was in Charlotte, this past public hearing, we had a lot of people who got up and said, I live in southeastern Charlotte, I live in southeastern Mecklenburg. Why are we in a congressional district that contains Robeson County, which is a rural county that's very far away, that doesn't have the same interests as us? That's the kind of stuff that we are trying to train people to do, because that's the stuff that we think is effective, can actually influence the maps, and also provides a really good amount of information to the legislators who are trying to draw the maps. So, you know, if you get up and you say, I hate this system, you're not wrong. I mean, I agree with you, but you're not doing something that is giving them information that could possibly change the way that they draw the maps. And so that's what we try to do at all the line. You know, and just to say anything, and all those great, you know, geographically specific comments are things that are going to go into the public record as well. And we know, we've seen in the past that when there's litigation, that public record often comes into play. So, you know, the one thing that I will say is, while agreeing with Jane about everything that's wrong with this process, the attention that people are paying, the way that they really want to do things right and do things in a smart way, the energy that they're willing to devote to keep this process accountable is the thing that actually makes me as hopeful as I can possibly be this year. So, and again, I want to thank you all for being here, because you all are part of that. Your attendance at this and all the people who are watching online just sort of proves my point that people are keeping a close eye on this, and they're trying to watch things like this and get educated about it so they can engage in a way that really makes a difference. Thanks.
I get to play musical chairs, which is a nice thing. So thank you. Thank you, Lekha. Our next presenter is Hilary Klein, who is a senior counsel for voting rights with the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, a nonprofit organization founded in August 2007, right here in Durham. SCSJ is a team of lawyers, community organizers, researchers, and media specialists that support communities of color in their efforts to dismantle structural racism and oppression. In the last redistricting cycle, SCSJ represented plaintiffs, including me, one of those plaintiffs, in several states throughout the South, challenging plans as racially discriminatory. In her role as senior counsel for voting rights, Hilary engages in advocacy and litigation to protect voters throughout the South, and served as part of the trial team that successfully challenged NC's most recent voter ID law. More recently, Hilary and her team have been partnering with local grassroots organizations here in North Carolina and throughout the South to support advocacy related to redistricting and building the capacity of communities to advocate for fair maps at the state and local levels. Hilary.
Thank you so much, Professor, and thank you to the organizers for having me and giving me this opportunity to be with all my wonderful fellow panelists. I agree with a lot that has been said already, and I do not feel the need to revisit a lot of this. Obviously share a lot of the concerns about the current process that have already been expressed. So I'm going to take a little bit of another angle on this and turn to what can people who are engaging in this wonderful set of panels, and what people can do going forward, and kind of concentrate on that aspect. And in short, I think what you can do going forward, if you really want to engage on this, is to get informed, which if you're listening right now, it means you're already doing that. But also show up and make yourself heard. There are challenges in this redistricting process in North Carolina to actually make that happen. But what's something I don't think that has been discussed a lot is how, yes, redistricting is happening right now, but it's happening at a lot of different levels. There is local redistricting happening on the county level right now. And also, as far as longer term redistricting reform that was talked about in the panel right before this, that kind of reform, can extend past just this redistricting cycle that's happening in the legislature right now. And one thing that's really exciting about the unprecedented level, I think, of engagement and education this cycle that Lekha talked about, is that maybe there will be more motivation to have and see those kinds of reforms, but to local citizens and other residents pushing for that can be very helpful, and staying engaged in this even after maps have been drawn and voted on. So just to talk a little bit more about the local level that I don't think has been talked a lot about recently, local municipalities, cities, and counties are being redistricted right now. And there, at that local level, there is, I think, a lot more opportunity for individuals to become engaged, to demand transparency, and to be closer, a little bit closer to the process. And so wonderful things that I hope my fellow panelist, Joe Nichols, talks about, but the League of Women Voters, for example, has been pushing for transparency at the local level with some success. And individuals showing up at the local level, even just knowing who your county commissioners are, how they're elected, what the lines are. A lot of county commissioners are elected still partially at large, and at large systems at the local level have historically been used, for example, to dilute the voting power of a minority populations in counties and voters of color. So kind of getting educated about the local level and becoming engaged on that, you'd be surprised at how accessible that process can be, because not a lot of attention has been paid to the local level and municipalities and counties. And then just turning to the greater reforms on the process, I wanted to talk a little bit about, we've talked about the concerns and the challenges for the process, but what does a good redistricting process actually look like? And what are the kinds of things that we should be demanding at the local and the state level? And what are things that other states have? And I think that the bedrocks for these reforms, which have been talked about, are a transparent process where the people that are doing the map drawing are doing so in the public view, and that they are in that way accountable to the people who they are supposed to be serving. And that includes genuine planning, genuine opportunity for the public, and something that we haven't seen, I think, in the past, which is the requirement that the people drawing the maps have to address, at least in some degree or in some form, the public comment that has been made. That's something that I think in the last panel it was talked about how there were dozens and dozens of hearings in 2011, but then in the litigations that came out afterwards, it came to light that virtually none of that public hearing and public input was actually conveyed to the person in that basement actually doing the map drawing. And so requiring the people who are drawing the maps to be accountable, to explain, what the public comment has been and why or why not they are taking that public comment into account. And then the other part of the reform are making it a truly nonpartisan process. And in other states, you've seen there's a variety of new reforms or recent reforms in this process that we're seeing. Some are through political appointees, which in my opinion is not truly nonpartisan. It's just you now have a proxy for the people who are sitting in the political chairs. But having like a redistricting commission that really is comprised of residents, of non-politicians, and I think there California has a really interesting structure where they have a pool of applicants that's vetted through different administrative bodies, and then it's presented, and instead of being appointed, that citizen redistricting committee members can take applicants out. Legislatures can take applicants out, but they don't actually appoint anybody to it. And then in the end, the selection is made somewhat at random from this vetted pool of applicants. That's a really interesting process. I think people seem pretty happy with that in California. They also have, a lot of other transparency measures and a really much more accessible website than we have in North Carolina, which I think was touched on. The website here leaves a lot to be wanted. So looking to other states and their experiences, and reforms like that, that's probably not going to happen right for this cycle. It's too late. But if you can stay engaged and stay knowledgeable about this, supporting advocacy organizations by being one of those grassroots advocates, by telling them what's going on in your community and engaging. I think when you get in this space, you also get the benefit of meeting a lot of really motivated people who care about their communities. And I think that is a reward in of itself. And so if you do choose to get engaged, those are a couple ideas. I'm sure there hopefully will be more questions about that, but I will just leave you for now with those thoughts on how you can get engaged going forward. Thank you.
So last but not least, thank you, Hilary. I bring you Joe Nichols, who was born and raised in Rayford, North Carolina, graduated from East Carolina with a BS in elementary education, then received her Master's of Education from Loyola University in Baltimore. She has been an educator for 32 years. Joe worked as a teacher for the last 14 years as an elementary school principal in Prince George's County Public School System in Maryland. Throughout her tenure, Joe has been an advocate for all children in making sure they had the best education they could achieve. While teaching, she became involved with the teachers and administrators unions, where she was president during her last years working. Working for the rights of all educators, Joe was involved with contract negotiations, marches, and assisting other administrators with their concerns. When she retired in 2003, she became involved with the League of Women Voters in Moore County, North Carolina, where she was president there for 10 years, then moved to the state level to become president in 2011 of the statewide league. She returned at the state level as president in 2019 and is continuing another term as their leader. Working with members across the state, she has been visible in many activities involving issues that are concerning of the people of North Carolina, especially voting rights and women's rights. We are fortunate to have such a great organization of dedicated members who want to make the community better in all of these areas. Just pause. It's a remarkable experiential wisdom sitting on both sides of the ear. We should take stock of that. She is also an avid golfer. Did not know that. Spends time in the links with friends, as well as enjoying many mountains and beach trips with her family. Joe Nichols.
Good afternoon and welcome my partners, my own partners in crime with me. On behalf of the league, I thank Gunther and Asher also for inviting the league to participate in this event. And I brought the league pamphlets out back, out in front there, pick up one and join us. But yes, we are definitely heavily involved with the redistricting that's happening now. We have many of our members that are giving testimony regarding the process of the General Assembly's statewide redistricting public comment sessions. We are sending them the message this process must be transparent and with public participation. Every one of our members that have spoken, and we've had one in every single session, and I'm going to be giving the culminating one tomorrow night in Fayetteville. Please join me if you would like to come over to Fayetteville. We are putting that message across. You have to be open. You cannot go behind the scenes. You cannot go into another room as you did before. I'll have to tell you the experience because Jane and I go way back in the last process when they had the testimonies going on. I went to Raleigh, got there at 8 a.m. in the morning at the museum where they were holding the one hearing. And I did not get called up until 4 o'clock that afternoon. And when I got up, I gave my little spiel, put the piece of paper down for them to have their coffee, and then turned around to leave because I was ready to go home back to Seven Lakes, North Carolina. I know you're my neighbor. And all of a sudden, Senator Russo was the senator that was involved there, the chairman that day. And he said, "Young lady." And I thought, whoa, wait a minute. Some of my sexist came up in a little bit there that you're calling me young lady, but that's all right. I know you're a Southern person. Young lady, what is the definition of the minority majority? And he said, I said, well, sir, On behalf of the league, since I'm speaking on behalf of the league today, I don't have my vocabulary book here to give you the definition for that, but I'll be glad to email it to you. And then I just turned around and walked out. And so our lawyer then was Anita Earls, who is now a judge and stuff and everything. And Anita came up to me as I was leaving and she said, "That was damn good." And she said, "I really wanted to get up and help you." I said, "Well, I didn't really have the exact meaning of it from the league standpoint. I knew what it meant, but I couldn't give my perception in because I was speaking on behalf of the league." But that was an experience, my first time of being the president of the state league, to be jumped into that. We're sending them messages, as we said, with transparency and public participation, promoting our mission of empowering voters and defending democracy. The League of Women Voters of North Carolina is developing a model for civics education, which will focus on promoting voter engagement to specific areas of reform, beginning first with redistricting and voter protection, then later including all of our other issues of healthcare, education, social justice, environment, ERA, and women's rights. Our goal is to give citizens the knowledge and the confidence to participate in governmental change that will strengthen our democracy. We're developing a model for citizen education and advocacy that is practical, activist, and problem-centered. Where some civics programs for adults developed by the league and others aim for an understanding of the bureaucracy of the government, such as how legislatures, commissions, councils, and so forth work together. Our program will introduce citizens to government in action and demonstrate how citizens can and must be involved in order to protect democracy. This will be done by developing a well-trained voter watch team who will function as monitors and advocates for this cycle of redistricting. We will be promoting awareness and proficiency in advocating on issues voters care about. This is only one facet that the league does here in North Carolina. We invite you to join our mission and to fight for our democracy. The things we have been doing for redistricting, we've been holding league action team meetings to share information among our 18 leagues. And you say, why don't you have leagues in every county? We'd like to, we don't. Some of them are combined. We have a very active league for Orange, Durham, Chatham County. That's in your area. They're very active. Developing a toolkit for redistricting, which includes, as the others have said, tips for giving testimony facts, talking points, op-eds, letters to the editor samples, and more social media information. We've been talking to communities about the process of redistricting and how it affects their community or themselves. We've been holding webinars on redistricting, what we call 101, how to give testimony again, observing your local governmental bodies, and examining maps. We've been observing the process, as I said, of the hearings. We wrote op-eds and letters to the editors through the state in different counties, as well as our state capital. We're working with other organizations that you see up here in front, that we sent a joint letter to giving the expectations for the map drawing process. Newsletters and action alerts to our members are encouraging them to be more involved in the process. Join our fight.
So thank you all four of you. And I have just going to pause and ask one question of all four of you first as we get going, and then I'll welcome the questions from the audience. And just, if you could ask a question, make a comment if you'd like, to make sure you ask a question as well. So my question is actually comes from some experience having done a little bit of some of the things that you've just heard up here, which is as an historian, you look at the past, what has created real reform? It's been all of these pieces. It's been grassroots pressure. It's been legal campaigns. It's been advocacy understood in kind of mutually collaborative ways. And so it's also working nonpartisan across the aisle, because in fact, this is a kind of peculiar problem that if you're only working within one party, you cannot solve the problem, because in fact, it is almost by definition partisan. And I will say this as someone who is a registered Democrat, but who has canvassed hundreds of Republicans in rural parts of our state around gerrymandering. I hear this a lot, and lots of discovery. The number of Republican citizens who are in favor of nonpartisan redistricting is extraordinary. And in rural Wake County, it's 75, 80%. Republicans are fully in favor of a better process. An anti-corruption message transcends partisan boundaries. There's just no question of that. That's clear in polling. It's clear in any kind of conversations you have with good citizens. And so one of the questions is why, how do we organize? And so in everything I just heard, it was like, I was just thinking about this. There's public testimony, which is a form of organizing. There's the law and plaintiffs, which is a form of organizing. Plaintiffs don't just emerge out of nothing. They are found. Doing the kind of grass tops and grassroots leadership that the league does so effectively is organizing at various levels. But my question then is really about how do you think, how all of you, this is the first question, and then I want to, it's not where I thought we were going to start with, but I just want to ask. It's a tough one. How do you see organizing people who you might disagree with? And what, if you have a story to tell that really would amplify what has worked, I think that would be really helpful, because I do think that's in some ways the gist of the problem. Someone has viewed you as the problem. How have you engaged them, and how do you organize to build that bigger majority that we know is out there and that wants a better system? And why don't you, if you could just, we can share the mic here. That mic works. Someone want to try that? All right.
I think there are a lot of ways to organize. The thing I always like best is a crisis. And because that gives you the momentum, I am concerned that this process is going to look just good enough that it's going to assuage some of people's concerns. But I don't know that. And in the meantime, we need to talk to the people who we don't agree with on any other issue. And my job is at the Coalition for Lobbying and Government Reform started in 2006. And the two people who supported it and gave us our initial funding were Art Pope, who was here earlier today, whose position is libertarian, and Jim Goodman, who owns WRAL, whose position is very progressive. But they agreed that there were problems in our government that needed to be changed. And one of them was redistricting, the other was ethics and openness. So you have to find one small place where you can agree with people and build from there. I think we tend to demonize each other. And at a fundamental level, we all tend to agree. The polling that I've seen in North Carolina says that better than 70% of the people in this state think it's time to change the way we do redistricting. And some of them it's for philosophical reasons, some of them it's for political reasons. And to be honest, for some people it's financial reasons. Some of the estimates are that we've put better than $100 million into resolving redistricting litigation since 1980. We lead the country in lawsuits. In fact, North Carolina and Texas together have had more litigation than the other 48 states put together. When we had to do a special election, congressional election in 2016, that was, I believe, $9.85 million just to hold that election. Every time the General Assembly comes back, it's $50,000 a day. So people may not agree with you because it's philosophically right or politically right, but they may be tired of wasting money, so find that spot. The city of Greensboro this year is doing a citizens commission that will advise the city council. It's a small step, but you can do that. And I challenge, and I told Professor Peck I was going to do this, Duke students to hold a public hearing, hold your own public hearing. Ideally, you could collaborate with North Carolina Central and be able to speak to the population of Durham County, but that's a perfect way with the reputation that Duke has, the reputation that Central has, to bring these things forward at a time and a place that are convenient for most people. And it will bring the message forward that it's just not the old people's generation that care about redistricting reform, but indeed the generation that will be in power for the next 40 years.
Thanks, Jane. So I'm actually a historian by training as well. My PhD is in history from UNC, and I'm actually a Roman historian. So as an ancient historian, I actually feel like my perspective on how change happens may be a little bit different. I think my perspective more aligns with the idea, and I think this is something that Jane also picked up on. It's about self-interest. Things change when people's self-interest comes into play and they have the power to do the thing that serves them in a self-interested way. So I think that one thing that we, really want to work on at All on the Line is accountability. Honestly, I think we believe that if enough people are hassling legislators on particular issues, we can get some movement on those issues. I think particularly as pertains to the redistricting process. I mean, right now we're really thinking about how can we get more public hearings after maps are proposed. I really believe that if you give them hard enough time, you can sometimes get them to move on those kinds of things, because they really don't like it when you fill up their email boxes. They really don't like it when you jam up their phones. And noisy. So sometimes you can get results from that. But I think that in terms of a wider ranging kind of reform, it may take a change in the majority of the legislature, to be perfectly honest. In that case, we would be in a situation where both sides have been on the receiving end of gerrymandering. And that may actually finally bring about enough incentive to change the way redistricting is done in North Carolina. But until then, I say, keep hassling them. I mean, annoyance is a great motivator.
Thank you.
I think what we have done is groups together by notifying the legislators with a letter and some expectations that we'd like to see from them, encourages them, because the league is known as the people who always sue. And my thing is, if we sue, if you would do your job, we wouldn't have to sue. We could work together. And this is my lawyer.
The Southern Coalition for Social Justice, we come at this question a little bit differently, I think. We are a community lawyering organization, which means that we try to be responsive to the expressed needs of the communities in the South that we serve, and come at this approach from training and education and empowering those communities to have self-determination and have their voices heard where they have not been historically heard. So for example, this redistricting cycle, we started early with over a year ago with a program called the Crowd program, where we trained hundreds of educators throughout the South, hundreds of advocates, throughout the South about redistricting early, so that they could take that information and go back to their communities. We're nonpartisan, and we went into that without a specific agenda. It was very technical training. It was, this is how you use this free application to draw your own maps. This is what the law looks like. This is what has happened in your community. These are the organizations working in your community. So it was without agenda and without an explicit view one way or the other, but really about allowing people to have agency themselves. And similarly, now that in North Carolina, these public hearings have happened, we have similarly held multiple programs, again, to get education out on, we have something called Testimony Tuesdays, where groups, again, invited, open to the public, come learn how to give valuable testimony. And again, without agenda, it's more technical advice. This is what process testimony is. Talk about what you care about the process, what you want to see in the process, what the issues have been with the process. And then these are substantive comments. Talk about your community, what your community looks like, and what you want to see in a map, for example, without agenda. And we've also done various other tours before the public hearings to address specific community concerns for the public hearings that have been held for the state maps. So we come at this from a little bit of a different perspective of without that underlying agenda and really about building platforms for people to be heard. And advocacy is one of those platforms. Litigation is also one of those platforms. It's, in my opinion, not the ideal platform. Advocacy is always the first option and the preferred option, but really about building platforms for those voices that have not historically been heard, to be heard and to give them the resources to make it happen.
Really well said. So let's, I wanted to open it up to questions at this point, and if you could just, oh, was there questions in the chat?
Yeah, you'd like.
Sure, can you, do you need the mic?
Yeah. Can you just bring one back?
Why don't I just take this one and we'll use it? Okay, perfect, sure.
All right, so here's a question from in the chat. All right, so if you became state legislatures today and you were in charge of redistricting, one, how would you go about it? And two, are you confident that you could draw maps that would pass the muster of the court and whatever legal challenges were brought against them? Don't all speak at once.
My answer would be the California system. The California Commission is made up of 14 citizens, whittled down from, I believe it was 30,000 in 2010. It matches the racial, ethnic, and gender makeup of the state. They held a lot of hearings. They heard from something over 2,500 citizens. And my favorite story of it is that Representative Maxine Waters, who's been in Congress for as long as I can remember, which is a fairly long time, came to speak and was irate because they gave her 2 minutes, which is what they gave every other citizen. So there was no special thing that power and prestige got. And I think the maps they drew were fantastic. They had one lawsuit. The lawsuit was on whether or not they could be allowed to draw the maps. The court said what they were indeed entitled to do it, and they did a good job. They're doing a good job this time too.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think the California system has a lot of things to recommend it. I think in general, it's actually probably not that hard not to gerrymander. You know, I just think about the public hearings that we've held and we've heard from people. And I think, you know, we've heard from people what they want to see for their communities. I think that if you are in a situation where the majority of people in a community are telling you something that they want to see in their district, and you follow that and you try the best of your ability as constrained by population and other things, but you try to give them what they actually think would make them feel well represented. That is how you create a good map, in my opinion, is by following what actual community members tell you will make them feel properly represented. And I think that the problems that we see now is that all communities are kind of being disregarded. I mean, we see even in very, you know, with the Republicans, the majority, even with very Republican areas, cities are split up. You know, Gastonia is split into, I think, at least 3 different House districts. I doubt the people of Gastonia who live in that city want that. Maybe they do, but I don't think that those lines were drawn on the basis of what they wanted. So something else is happening there. So I think that if you actually were listening to what the people in these areas want, and we constantly hear from people that they don't want their cities split up, you know, you would kind of head off a lot of the things that result in gerrymandering.
No, I would not run for legislature right now. I challenge younger people out there to get involved in your government and do it now. Don't let it go, but whatever they said, that's us too, the California map.
I'll just say, obviously, my private efforts to get Joe to run for office have not been persuasive. I think it's 100% absolutely possible for legislatures to have a good process and to draw maps that withstand legal challenge. And I think it was this panel or the panel before this, or even a panel earlier today, there was discussion about these ensemble analyses that are used And if you look at the maps that were drawn in the past in North Carolina, there was statistical analysis saying, you know, there's a broad spectrum of how you could draw these maps, and this statistical analysis shows that they had to have been racially gerrymandering. There's no other way they could have got to where they got to. So it's not just, you know, that, yes, the map drawing process is technical, and yes, there are various legal requirements to that, but there is a clear path through all of that and good options for maps that can withstand all of the applicable requirements. If you have the right intentions. And I think the statistical analyses and the power that we have to show that the right intentions were not used in the past have been very powerful in bringing that to light.
Thank you. Other questions? I'll ask one, although I'd also invite other live audience members to ask one too. First of all, thank you all for being here sincerely. We know we're still in the middle of the public comment period and recognize that some of you are skipping meetings or sending colleagues to meetings so that you could be here in person, and for our online audience, which is still hanging in there. So we're grateful for that. When we planned this session as the last session of this conference, it was because this is an issue on which it's so easy to arrive in a dark place. And we wanted to end with a sense of possibility. And so while I acknowledge your very legitimate criticisms of the process, I also just appreciate your commitment to fighting for change. And so I want to ask very concretely, because all of you expressed various aspirations for what that change could look like. For students in the room, students at Duke, and our online audience, what are like one or two concrete things that they could do starting today if they want to get involved in this or take action for fairer maps? Great question. You stole my last question. Great. Sure. That's perfect. That's great. Yeah. Who wants to start?
I will say, and it's going to be hard for some people in this room to hear, if you can do nothing else, write a letter. Write a letter to your elected official. Write a letter to the editor. Do not send email. They hit the delete button as they go down. They may count the numbers, but these days a letter is so rare that they indeed may read it. If that's the only thing you can do, great. If you have a little more time, educate 5 of your friends. If you have a little more time after that, please write some public comment. Everybody who's listening to this is smart enough to say, here's how you should do it. And then if you have even more time after that, reach out to one of us and find out what more you can do. This is not something that's going to go away right away. I will tell you, they will probably start drawing maps in the next month. I can predict that with pretty good credibility because I have a vacation scheduled. And that has been an absolute indicator of when a piece of legislation that I'm supposed to be working on is going to happen. So it's either going to happen about 10 days from now or about the first week in November. So you don't have a lot of time. Take action now.
I think I would say if you feel like you have any, where you live, if you have any investment in the community that you live in, if you feel any kind of way about your community, I'd say give a public comment. Talk about that community, its needs, how you would like to see it represented. I think that is the thing that we know could possibly influence the process now. It's also the thing that's going to go into the public record for any future possible, anything that happens. So that's both something you can do right now and something that's going to have can have effects over the long term. I'd also say, we're going to be following the process really, really closely, and there are going to be a lot of moments where you could step in. So we're going to be watching when they are drawing these maps, and we are going to alert people as to when we see things that are coming up that are sketchy, that don't look right, that replicate gerrymanders we've seen in the past. And we're going to ask people to, go and contact the legislators about that, maybe add another public comment about that in particular. So I'd say, find a way to stay in touch with what's happening in the process. And you will know there will be moments that you will be activated to respond to what is actually happening then. So I'd say yes, public comment, but also there are just going to be a lot of opportunities for action as the process goes along, because me and the other people here will be watching it really, really closely, and we will let you know what's going on. And there will be moments where you will want to put pressure on legislators.
Still the mic for a second. If you do public comment, please send it to one of us. It will not be public information for quite a while. What we found last time was very helpful was that one of our organizations had it, we could put it on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever. So legislators couldn't say, oh, I didn't know that, because that is what some of them will say. Some of them won't know it, some of them will.
2 words, get involved, starting at your local level. Go observe any of the governmental bodies that are there in your county, in your area, and then join the league. Get that pamphlet out there and look up our website. We'll have information updated on everything that's going on.
And I will +1 to everything that's been said, and just urge you to stay engaged on this. Don't become active in it just now and then forget about it and think I don't have to think about this for another 10 years. Stay engaged, because I think there is room for reform, and that can happen at any time. So stay engaged.
Just permit me to one little quick, I love the theme of local accountability, localism, and I think for students, sometimes that's been a challenge, at least at Duke, because they feel like, oh, we can vote in a presidential election and we want to, or we want to vote for senator because that's something that we see, but we don't know enough about the local city council, say, even if it's a Duke grad who's running. And so I think one of the things that would be really lovely to think about is also how students know that they are local actors right here and right now. And I just want to shout out the 26th Amendment, which was ratified 50 years ago and a couple of weeks ago by North Carolina, which lowered the voting age to 18. But one of the things that it did that is so important is it made it absolutely transparent that students are local citizens, period, even if they live elsewhere, and they have an opportunity to really change and act and transform their community right here. And one reason we have a campus gerrymander at Duke is because when they drew the maps back of local precincts back in the late 60s, they did not want Duke students having too much influence and authority in our city council context. So we actually have a campus gerrymander right here. You have to walk 45 minutes to find the polling site on election day. So finding ways to see those connections, to trace them, is an opportunity. So, and I would love the idea of a public hearing at Duke and at Central. Wouldn't that be exciting? So I'm down with that. Let's talk.
I was just going to say that Common Cause, Democracy North Carolina, and a bunch of other groups publish voter guides every election. And it is a pain in a certain part to do it, particularly when we have to do municipal elections. But those are available online. Go to commoncausenc.org and you will find the voter guides. Most of the bigger cities in the state won't have municipal elections this year because they have to draw new districts, but indeed Durham does. And you are just outside the window, or no, I'm not sure what the close on voter registration was here. Hilary may know that. In Durham County.
I think you can do same day registration during early voting.
That's true.
So it's early voting. We don't have an early vote site, but if you are not registered, you can register and vote. And what a great law, what a great provision. Thank you, DMNC.
I'm going to plug League of Women Voters Vote 411, which is an excellent .org. You can go and find out any information on any of the candidacy that's happening.
Thank you. So we have time for at least another question, if there is one, if someone wants to raise their hand, and or if we have one in the chat. I have more that I can ask, but I would much rather have from y'all. Anyone? Yeah. Did you want to come? Or, thank you. Good.
Thank you all so much for sharing your insight and perspectives on this issue. My question is just more so a little bit out of curiosity about something that I've learned recently, and I was wondering if you could provide some insight into the phenomenon of prison gerrymandering and how that fits into this conversation about redistricting.
Sure, absolutely. I can speak on that. And the Southern Coalition for Social Justice has engaged on this issue throughout the South. So prison gerrymandering is basically the practice for when we have the census to count people who are incarcerated, where they are incarcerated, instead of what we think would be the better policy to count them at their last residence. And the reason this is an issue is because when states and localities, and especially localities, are redistricting, they'll take into account that incarcerated population, and that creates a distortion because the people who are incarcerated there don't have that genuine constituency relationship with the representatives of where they are incarcerated. They do probably with their last residence, right? If they have children, that's where their children are going to school. If they have family, that's where their family is. And that's where they're most likely to return after incarceration. And you remember, people can be incarcerated for any period of time, you know, even as short as a year, but if they happen to be incarcerated during the census, then that's where they're counted. So this distortion, I think it's about 11 states, don't quote me on that, but most recently Connecticut have fixed this issue at the state level and said it's going to be our policy now. We're going to use data to either to exclude the population when we redistrict, the incarcerated population. North Carolina is not one of those states, but localities and even the state could choose to fix this if they wanted to. And the distortion that this creates is most pronounced at the county level. So if you imagine you have, 3,000 people per district for county commissioner. And in one of those districts, like 1,500 of those people are incarcerated. That means there are really only 1,500 genuine constituents in that area. And so there's a vote dilution for every other district. You know, those representatives have to represent double the number of people as that one prison gerrymandered district. But it also has a wider repercussion, which is why some national groups like the Prison Policy Institute have engaged on this, because of the issues of, the pandemic of the endemic mass incarceration and the over-incarceration, disproportionately incarcerated people of color from urban areas. This has created a power shift from urban centers to rural areas when you start counting people who are incarcerated where they're incarcerated. So there are fixes proposed at the national level and some of the national legislation that's been proposed, which would change the census to count incarcerated people at their last residence, and that would be the most ideal solution. But until that happens, what we can do is encourage localities to exclude those populations of incarcerated people when they redistrict. And that will allow for not prevent the distortion that would happen. And I want to be clear about one thing, and is that this is in no way, by suggesting to exclude those populations, this in no way endorses disenfranchising people who are incarcerated who otherwise might be eligible, and this in no way endorses any kind of census count that would only count citizens or people who are not incarcerated. That's not what it's about at all. What that solution is really about is just using the data we have, eliminating that distortion with the tools we have now. The best solution would be for the census to change and to count people where they have that genuine constituent relationship. And a lot of, I think 200 plus localities throughout the nation have decided to end prison gerrymandering where they are, outside of the states that have ended it. And, North Carolina's localities can do that. And we have a lot in our rural areas. We have a lot of these incarcerated populations. So it's absolutely possible when municipalities and when counties are redistricting the cycle for them to fix this issue.
Quick comment on that. The other solution, maybe part of that, would be letting those who inmates who have voting rights make sure they actually have them while they're incarcerated. So if you have a misdemeanor, you still can vote. But there's currently very little access outside of a few urban counties to the incarcerated so that they could vote while in prison. I realize that's not a winning political campaign slogan for either party, but we are talking about thousands of people. And having registered people in the Durham County Jail, it's enormously important and meaningful to the incarcerated to know that they have a voice. Man, is that powerful work. So if they could vote, then that might also change the problem you're describing. So are there any other questions we have for these terrific panelists before we thank them? So let me thank them and thank you for your great questions. And thank you, Deandra and Asher, for this incredible conversation about our democracy and the hope in it and the critique at every stage. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gunther, and thank you to our amazing panelists. I just want to close this out, and before I do, to say that we have some small parting gifts to express our thanks to our amazing panelists. So Meg is, I think, coming in, and she's going to help to pass the message out. Thank you so much, Meg. I just want to thank you again, Gunther, for being an amazing moderator. I have to say, like, over the last 2 days, I have been so inspired by the conversations that we've had here, and just deeply proud of the role that a college, a university, that higher educational institutions can play in dealing with this kind of a challenge to our democracy. I think we saw the significance of the work of scholars like Jonathan and Gregory, and just how important it is that we continue thinking about challenges like gerrymandering and best practices for redistricting, and that we stay connected to activists, politicians, journalists, practitioners. I also take so much heart in seeing the diversity of participants that we've had. So we've had undergraduates, graduates, many guests join us. We are so delighted that you're here. To all of our participants online, thank you for being with us. And we'd like to invite everyone who's in person to join us outside right now on the lawn between Sanford and Rubenstein for an outdoor grab and go reception. So we have more cupcakes than we could possibly eat. And we hope that you will come and partake in them, and even take a few for the people you care about and share with them things that you learned today and some of the inspiration that you'll take away. And finally, I just want to do some thanks. So Paulus and the Duke Department of Mathematics would like to extend our sincere gratitude to every single panelist and moderator who's participated in this program over the last 2 days, to our keynote speaker, Judge Wynn, yesterday, to, oh gosh, just have an entire list, to Asher Hildebrand, the architect of this conference. And honestly, just, it's been a privilege to work with you in organizing this, Asher, and we can't thank you enough for bringing together such remarkable voices. And I think this is a conference that we at the Duke and the Duke community will remember for quite a while. And hopefully all of our participants will as well. We'd like to thank our Duke math colleagues, Jonathan Mattingly, Gregory Hirschlag, to our generous supporters and co-sponsors, Todd and Diana Stifel, for their generous support of this conference, to the Sanford School of Public Policy, to the Trinity College of Arts and Sciences, and to Team Paulus, Meg Biddle, who's right there in the back, Braden Hammond, who you'll see running around. We could not have done this without them. Also, our amazing Paulus Directors Fellows, our many student volunteers. Thank you, thank you. And again, to everyone for being with us, thank you very much. And we hope to see you at our next events. Take care and hope to see you outside.